I ate a very, very strict carnivore diet for more than 40 days. In fact, for the initial 30 days, I primarily ate three things: beef, salt, and I guess it's not really eating, but water. And that was it. I'm going to tell you why I did it, what happened, and what my plan is going forward. So to really, truly understand the change that happened, I would probably have to tell you the full story and jump back a little over a year, but let me make this quick. If you just want to know, did it help or not? The answer is yes. Did I lose weight or not? The answer is yes. I lost about 20 pounds over the 40 days. I was on quite a few different medications, from supplements to painkillers to different things to try and alleviate symptoms I was having. I have stopped every single supplement or medication, and I went from a state of barely being able to walk, being in a walker, a wheelchair, or on the best days using a cane to walk very short distances. When I say short distances, I mean that I could not go to a grocery store and walk through the store, up and down the aisles. The distance from the car to the parking lot, and I wasn't even driving the car. If someone drove me to the store, I couldn't walk through the grocery store or hardware store. It was just too far. I would wear out by the time I got out. And it wasn't just fatigue. I would be physically, mentally, completely drained to the point to where it was not only hard to walk, it would be hard to speak. And all of these were due to some very strange autoimmune issues. So the short version is, I went from that state of health with really not a very good explanation why, to the last couple of days, I have been going on walks of about 2 miles each day. In addition to walking around the house, I can go to the grocery store, I can walk around, I can walk up and down as many aisles as I want. Looking back over the last month plus, it seems like it is a night and day difference. So what did I eat and why? Well, as I said right at the beginning, initially I started off with a very strict, what many people refer to as the lion diet, where you only eat ruminant animals. So that would be beef, lamb, bison, elk, deer. You have salt and water. And I did this because I wanted to eliminate all types of plants or even some animals that have diets that are heavily influenced by plant. So that meant eliminating eggs and pork, any animals with a single stomach. And I wanted to introduce those later slowly, which I since have done, which I'll get into in a moment. So at the beginning, there is a transition period. I did not go into this on a whim. I heard about this. I researched it like crazy. I found so many other people with similar autoimmune issues that were doing it, and it was working, that I felt like I really have nothing to lose. I was diagnosed by some doctors with Guillain-Barré syndrome it's been about a year ago that the official diagnosis happened, in about April of 2022. I was hospitalized. I had visited many, many doctors before that. I'd even been to the hospital, and they basically just sent me home and said, come back if you don't feel better. But eventually I was admitted, and that was the diagnosis. It's not very common. It is, however, an autoimmune disease that happens suddenly. It can be triggered by things. It can be triggered by different medications people take. It can be triggered by illnesses. It was not a vaccine for me, so I just want to put that out there. But it very well may have been triggered by a very well-known illness, we shall say, related to such things. That is my best guess based on kind of the timeline and the history of everything. But I started having issues about 14 months ago. It took 2 months of this slow digression where it got harder and harder to move. It got more painful. I had nerve pain just throughout my entire body. The symptoms were just so wide and vast, it was really hard to figure out. We're talking about high heart rate. Losing my balance was one of the very first things, if not the first thing, that I noticed. I would say one of the worst parts was migraines that would last for literally days on end with no relief, night or day. And speaking of relief, I found nothing that would take the edge off. The nerve pain was indescribable throughout my entire body, and resting, sleeping, nothing helped. I would often wake up in the middle of the night feeling like my body just ran a marathon without me, and I would wake up exhausted. And it was just the weirdest things that I've never experienced before. And the crazy part is I go to all these different doctors. We run hundreds, if not thousands, of lab tests. I had MRIs, CAT scans, brain scans, everything they could possibly think of. And everything they test comes back normal. And that was extremely frustrating, because you even start to get some people that are like, well, there doesn't seem to be really anything wrong with you. And I'm kind of the opinion of, well, obviously there's something wrong. I was just going for jogs a month or two ago of a few miles, and now I struggle to walk. There's something clearly wrong here. And it eventually got to the point where I was basically completely disabled. I just had to sit in a recliner all day long. I could barely get up to eat or to just do the basic necessities of life. And it was very, very frustrating because I had no answers. Now, as I did mention, one of those initial hospital visits, the diagnosis they gave me was Guillain-Barré syndrome. One of the treatments for that is IVIG. It's an immunoglobulin infusion, so it's an IV treatment that you take for several days in a row. And the best way I can think of it working is somehow it suppresses your immune system. And I would say that the first time I had it, it stopped the progression of whatever was happening, but it didn't really make me better. I felt like when I was in the hospital, they're like, oh, you took the IV, you must be doing better. You can go home now. And I was like, but I don't feel any better. I guess I don't feel worse. So there's that, which was a blessing, because some people go with Guillain-Barré syndrome from completely normal, active people to completely paralyzed within days or within a couple of weeks. I was what they considered an abnormal case or an atypical case of Guillain-Barré syndrome, because my symptoms didn't take days or weeks. They took a couple of months. So the progression was very slow, and all of the little pieces weren't quite what they normally see. So they were a little hesitant, I feel like, to come up with that diagnosis. But at the same time, they tested for everything you can test for that's similar, and they'll come out negative. Now, there is no test for Guillain-Barré syndrome, unfortunately, that definitively says that's what it is. It's a clinical diagnosis based on what it isn't. Unfortunately, I found lots of other diseases that work kind of that same way. So some of the things they could definitively check for, like multiple sclerosis, Lyme disease, all of those things were ruled out, and that's where I ended up. And the consensus was by the doctors here locally, over time, you're going to get better. They were like, most people get better in a year. I joined a lot of support groups, things online, researching things. I found that wasn't really always the case. I felt like maybe after a year or so is when they stopped seeing neurologists and things like that, because they kind of just know how to go about life, but they're still suffering with it. Not everybody completely recovers from Guillain-Barré syndrome. So I was really researching heavily, how do I get over this? Because I do not want to live life in a chair for the rest of my life. At the time when these symptoms started, I was running my own business. I was riding bicycles. I was riding motorcycles. I was flying airplanes. This was a huge change for me. And I know that drastic, terrible things happen, and some people have to live with that. And for me, that was a pretty hard thing to grasp. I feel like it took a few months to kind of come to the realization that this just might be my life now. This might be my new normal. But I didn't give up. I didn't stop researching. I didn't find any answers for basically a year. For 1 year, all of those symptoms, all of those pains, all of those things just continued to happen. The more I would exercise or the harder I would try and get through it or push through it, the worse it would get. My symptoms were directly correlated to my physical activity. If I tried to walk further, if I tried to move further, if I tried to even talk more, everything would progressively get worse in reaction to that. So I knew that exercise and just pushing through it after a while, because I tried it, wasn't going to work. So I came across people doing a carnivore diet specifically for autoimmune diseases. And the research I found, and I'll have to go through all of the things I've learned in many, many other videos. It's impossible to cover all of that now. But I wanted to tell you, this is why I did it, because of an autoimmune disease that one specialist I went to, whose specialty is Guillain-Barré syndrome, said, I don't agree. This isn't Guillain-Barré syndrome at all. So is it Guillain-Barré? Is it something similar? I don't honestly know, and no doctor can definitively tell me. But based on all of the symptoms, I think it is an autoimmune issue. I can't tell you the name of it, but that is the only thing that makes sense. And part of the reason for that is I've had celiac disease since I was a kid, so I already have some known autoimmune issues, and I know if you have one, you're more likely to have others. So I figured, well, this diet sounds nuts, it sounds crazy, but the science I found behind it and why it works to heal autoimmune issues makes sense. I really have nothing to lose. No doctor has any other suggestions. I'm going to try it. Now, some people have told me, well, some of these improvements must be because you cut out sugar, or they must be because you cut out carbs or junk food or things like that. And I want to be clear, I had done that before the carnivore diet. So I had already been eating a complete zero carb diet, no sugar, and I saw no change whatsoever with that diet. I don't doubt that it was healthier for me, but it wasn't helping whatever illness I was having. When I started the carnivore diet, within a couple of days, I said, you know what? I feel better. I can't quite put my finger on it. I can't definitively say that there's something that's improved, but I just feel like better somehow. After a couple of weeks, I started to feel more energy. I started to feel more endurance. Like I could walk further than I could before. The other interesting thing is, from the day I started 100% beef, salt, and water, I did not touch the cane, the walker, or the wheelchair. Now, I didn't walk far, but I did not have to use any of those from the day I started eating on a strict carnivore diet. And I think that is a really important point. Some people have some stomach issues or pains for 2-3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks, kind of almost like flu-like symptoms. And they describe this as oxalate dumping, which is something found in plants. That's part of the research behind this and why this works. That's for a whole nother video. And I will say that I experienced that. It did last maybe 2 to 3 weeks, and then it completely went away. And for me, the symptoms I was having were so debilitating that those symptoms were just, I felt like nothing to go through. They weren't that bad at all. It was totally worth it to get through that small transition period. So after 30 days, I felt very confident this was working. I was walking significantly further. I felt so much better. I decided, you know what? I'm going to try to introduce a few other carnivore foods and see what happens. I'm confident that the beef, salt, water thing is working. The first thing was butter. and I had no reaction to that. The second thing I introduced was eggs. I did that very slowly. I did just egg yolks for a few days. Then I introduced the whites. Then I started just having whole eggs together. Again, I didn't notice any problems. I can't put my finger on that either, but I do feel like it doesn't do maybe the same for me as eating meat does, but it doesn't seem to be hurting the healing and the weight loss and all the good things I'm having, which is basically all of the symptoms disappearing, which is great. Obviously, that's what I wanted. I have also since introduced small amounts of cheese and a little bit of pork. Now, I've been very, very careful with all of these. I've been checking the ingredients, making sure that there is either nothing in these or only salt or only specific dairy products. I'm making sure there's no colorings, there's no vegetable enzymes, there's no plant-based anything of any sort. And I think that is really, really important if you're doing this for an autoimmune issue. If it's just weight loss or some other health issue, I think you can get away with some of the other plant things and do more of a keto style diet. But for me, as I said, I had already been doing that and it was not making any difference whatsoever. So here I am, 40 plus days later. I have lost over 20 pounds of weight. I can walk a few miles every day, which I couldn't even barely walk around the house before. Most of my symptoms are gone. When I say that it hurt to talk and speak, I could last maybe 10-15 minutes talking to somebody, maybe do that once a day, and now I can talk for hours without any issues. I think it's very, very clear that this is working for me, and I would highly encourage anyone else with any sort of autoimmune issue to look into this, do the research. There is a lot of information out there. I will put some links in the description of this video to videos that I have watched that helped me get to this point and try this, that helped me get started. And my plan going forward is to keep on this. I'm going to slowly introduce more carnivore foods. So that means maybe I'll try some chicken one day. Maybe I'll try some fish, or maybe I'll have a little bit of milk in something. I'm still going to make sure that ruminant type meat is the majority of my food, though, because I know that that is working. It's night and day. I mean, I spent a year plus suffering with whatever this illness is, and in a month, I have made some drastic changes. And I honestly just can't wait to see where I'm at in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year from now. I finally have hope that I can go back to what is a normal, healthy life. And in the back of my mind, thinking about all of the issues I've had with autoimmune disorders growing up and as a teenager, as a young adult, I almost feel like, there's even a chance that I could be healthier after this than I've ever been. So I'm going to stick with it, and we'll see what happens.